In this video, we're going to go over everything Crohn's disease, from what is Crohn's, what are Crohn's symptoms, how do we diagnose it, what is the cause, what is the best treatment, what are the best diets, and just any questions you have about Crohn's disease, I'm going to answer it in this video. I was diagnosed with Crohn's in 2010. I've had symptoms all my life, but in 2010, right out of college, I got diagnosed. This is my colonoscopy report confirming that I had inflammation just about everywhere in my gut. So an endoscopy confirmed that I had it in my stomach and my duodenum. And the colonoscopy, they did the biopsies, and there was inflammation almost everywhere except for the transverse colon right here. And we did an MRI a few months later, and that confirmed that I had inflammation even in my small intestine, and I got that official diagnosis of Crohn's. But today, after years and years of trial and error, trying all the drugs, trying all the natural remedies, and working with a lot of other people, I've discovered the best and fastest way to put your Crohn's symptoms into remission. Not only have I did this in a matter of months after years of trying everything, and it has worked for many, many other people. So this is everything that I wish somebody would have told me when I first went into the doctor and I said, hey, I have diarrhea and gut pain and bloating and horrible gas. Like, what do I do? And it was just months and months of testing. And then even after I did get an official diagnosis, the treatments that I received did absolutely nothing. I want to save you all this time, pain, and money. Just by watching this video alone should reduce your symptoms by at least 25%. Just watching this video. And you'll understand why in a little bit. If I told you what the fastest way to go into remission is right now, you honestly wouldn't believe me. Truth is stranger than fiction. So all these people went through my 13-day protocol. I am not trying to sell you this. This is not for sale. But in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you some of the principles in my 13-day protocol. This is the tool that I use to help people get better. If I had to do this all over again, I would just make myself go through this day-by-day protocol. So if you want to fix something, you need to know what it is. So the modern definition of Crohn's disease is inflammation anywhere from mouth to butt, and it's chronic inflammation. If I punch somebody in the mouth and kick them in the butt, that won't be diagnosed as Crohn's disease because it's not chronic inflammation seemingly coming from nowhere because the immune system is overreacting or it has gone rogue. That is typically, you'll see little variations of this definition, but that is technically the definition nowadays. So Crohn's disease normally gets diagnosed when they find inflammation where the colon and the small intestine meet. So there's a few different parts of the small intestine. There's the jejunum and the ileum. This is the first part. This is the second part. This is the very, very first part, the duodenum. But it usually gets diagnosed when they find inflammation here. Why is it that way? We don't know. We can only guess. I believe it's that way because Dr. Crohn was the guy who discovered Crohn's disease in the 1930s. He did not want to call it Crohn's disease. He wanted to call it regional ileitis, which meant patches of inflammation in the small intestine. Now, you have to remember, in the 1930s, they just started developing X-ray technology. So in the 1930s, all they had to look at the small intestines was X-rays. And that technology did not change. They weren't able to see, you could see a little bit more as X-rays became better. But it wasn't until the 1970s where medical technology just took a big leap forward with things like the computer, camera, and MRI and CT scan technology. For the longest time, the term ileitis was very popular, and I think Dr. Crohn had something to do with that. I think he practiced up until the 1860s. I think he was one of the board leaders for the direction of the gastroenterologist group or something like that. So he had some control over the terminology. But in the 1970s and 80s, he wasn't in the picture anymore, and the GI doctors just ran with the term Crohn's disease. They almost called colitis Crohn's disease of the colon. Like, they were doing a bunch of weird stuff. So I personally do not like the term Crohn's disease because it's very confusing and it makes it hard for us to have an intelligent conversation. When you say you have Crohn's disease, like, I have to do a lot of homework to figure out where the inflammation is in your gut. But if you tell me you have regional ileitis, then I know that there's inflammation in the gut. Like, most of the people I talk to who say they have Crohn's disease, they literally have no idea where the inflammation is in their gut. And this is very important information we need to know. It would make more sense to say, oh, I have ileitis and colitis. Then I go, okay, I know that you have inflammation in the ileum and in the colon. That makes more sense. Now we can start having an intelligent conversation. You know, if somebody says, hey, I have gastritis, ileitis, and colitis, you know, that saves us 10, 15 minutes of conversation that we don't need to have. And most doctor's appointments barely last 30 minutes. So what is Crohn's disease? It is inflammation anywhere from mouth to butthole, but it usually gets diagnosed. That word is usually used to describe inflammation in the small intestine. And again, each doctor will use this term differently. I know, it doesn't make any sense, but that's how it is. So how does Crohn's disease get diagnosed? So first you come into the doctor and you have, a general doctor, and you have symptoms. So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to run blood tests to check for inflammation markers. And they also might do a stool test where they can also test for inflammation markers and look to see if you have an infection going on. And so if those numbers come back high, then we know, okay, there's inflammation somewhere in the body. Now let's go looking for it, and it's probably in the gut since you're having gut symptoms. And, and if the inflammation markers don't come back high and you still have symptoms, then they go, okay, all right, well, now let's do the colonoscopy and the endoscopy. So a colonoscopy is where they stick a camera up your butt and they take pictures of what's going on in your colon. Sometimes they put you to sleep. In America, they put you to sleep, but in a lot of other countries, they don't put you to sleep, or it's an extra charge. And while they have this camera up there, they might remove polyps. They'll usually do biopsies so they can look at your tissue under a microscope to see how deep the inflammation has gone into the tissue. They'll also do an endoscopy where they stick a camera down your throat and they see what's going on in your stomach and in the duodenum right here. So with these two tests, they can't get into the small intestine. So they might find inflammation going on in the colon and they'll go, okay, all right, well, you at least have colitis. But sometimes they can get the camera up to about here. It depends on how inflamed this is, but like they can get to here and know if you have inflammation here in a colonoscopy, but they really can't go any further. So it depends on the doctor and depends on how insistent you are on like, hey, let's get more tests. Let's do more tests. I need to know what's going on. But from there, they could diagnose Crohn's. They go, okay, there's inflammation here in the small intestine. Okay, we can diagnose Crohn's there. Okay, you got inflammation here, here, and here. There's inflammation everywhere. Okay, let's call it Crohn's. That's kind of how, it's a very wishy-washy term. It's just how it is. I know, it doesn't make much sense, but that's just how it is. They might look around and they don't see inflammation anywhere. Oh, there's no inflammation in the colon. I don't really see any inflammation here. Your stomach looks good. And you might have had symptoms 2 months ago and it's healed up by now. That's also a possibility. But sometimes they might order an MRI, a CT scan, or an X-ray so they can see what's going on in the small intestine. Now, if they do all of these tests and they don't see anything, they'll just go, oh, you have IBS. And you're still having symptoms. They go, oh, you have IBS. But they diagnose Crohn's disease when they find inflammation here. That's usually when it happens. Another procedure that I wish they did more of is a capsule endoscopy. This is where you swallow a pill with a camera in it, and it takes pictures all the way down your digestive tract. So with just one procedure, like they can see inflammation everywhere, anywhere and everywhere. I really wish they did more of this, but it's really not that popular. Can you diagnose Crohn's just based off your symptoms? That's hard to know. You really can't. You can take educated guesses, and we can learn a lot from our symptoms, but your colon and your small intestine produce a lot of the same symptoms. So it's kind of hard to do a diagnosis just based off of symptoms alone, but we can learn quite a bit from our symptoms. So the most common symptom of Crohn's disease is diarrhea. And there's a few different types of diarrhea we need to, consider. If it's just like normal diarrhea, it doesn't have like a really stinky, biley smell, then something could be going on in the ileum, or it could be going on in the small intestine or the colon. Now, if somebody has a biley, green, super stinky stool, then there's something going on in their gallbladder. And it almost burns when it comes out. It's foamy when it comes out. That will be the gallbladder. And that gets missed so many times. My gallbladder was causing at least 50% of my symptoms, and I was never diagnosed with a gallbladder issue, even though I had a ton of bile in my stool. I don't know why they didn't test for bile in my stool. It was absolutely crazy. If somebody has a lot of mucus in their stool, it's a safe bet that somebody has something going on, in the last part of the colon right here. Because if mucus is being produced in the small intestine or in the first part of the colon, it usually gets reabsorbed. So mucus means something's going on down here. If somebody has light blood in their stool, it usually means something's going on near the rectum, at the end of the colon. But if the blood is darker, then it could be further up the digestive system. If somebody is like bleeding in their stomach, if they're not puking up that blood, but if they're bleeding up here, their stools can be a dark black. Many other things can cause a black stool, like drinking Guinness beer and taking activated charcoal or drinking beet juice or something like that. But a dark purple stool means that the bleeding is happening high up the GI tract. Many people with Crohn's disease will have perianal fistulas, and they are considered Crohn's symptoms, but they are not connected to your small intestine. Like, it's a separate tissue. It's not the intestinal mucosa. It's the perianal ducts. The abscess and the perianal fistula, that involves the perianal ducts. It's a totally separate organ. Whereas Crohn's and Crohn's, that involves the intestinal mucosa. So in the modern world, in modern medicine, those two Crohn's, like you have Crohn's and, fistula is like underneath that umbrella. But if the GI community ever decides to adopt proper logic, they're two separate, they're two separate conditions. Gut pain and gut cramps are another really popular symptom. What's really interesting is that the intestinal mucosa actually doesn't experience pain. Like, that tissue can't experience, it's like your nail, it can't experience pain. Like, where the nail connects can experience pain. The intestinal muscles can experience pain. So a lot of what you'll get is like this pain and then it stops. Pain and then it stops. And that might happen every few minutes. And that's the peristalsis, the intestinal muscles slowly moving the food, throughout your gut. And when it clamps down, it's like clamping down on a wound and clamping down on inflammation. And then that's when it hurts. So A lot of time when we're dealing with pain with Crohn's disease, you'll take a painkiller and you'll also take a medication that like kind of makes your intestinal muscles move slower. So we're not like, it's like literally like you have like a wound on your arm and we're like grabbing it. That's where a lot of that pain sensation comes from. Most people with Crohn's have diarrhea, but some will have constipation. So diarrhea is when the intestinal muscles move really fast to get something out of you, but constipation is where the intestinal muscles are moving very slow to hold on to something precious. And we'll talk about that more later. So weight loss is, when all your food's going through you, somebody can lose a lot of weight and not look great. That is, I looked awful. I looked like a walking skeleton. Most people are going to have weight loss. Some people will have weight gain. Some people can gain weight, especially with certain medications like steroids. They just retain a ton of water weight. When somebody has weight gain, the kidney collecting tubules are involved, and that's caused by a traumatic event. And this traumatic event usually happens when we get the diagnosis. Hey, you have Crohn's. Hey, you have colitis. We're going to have to do major surgery. Your life's going to stink, quite literally. And it's like, oh wow, my life's over. My sports career is over. My modeling career is over. And then the body's like, oh no, like and it retains water because water is like our most important survival. Water is like the essence of all life, so it holds on to as much water as possible. But this is a new type of way of thinking about health that it's called German New Medicine. It was created by Dr. Hammer. We're going to go into more detail about this later, but that's where weight gain can happen. It's amazing how fast somebody can gain weight. Fevers and headaches are another very common symptom, and we'll talk about that in more detail later. Fatigue, another popular symptom. We're going to talk about that more later. Anal fissures and hemorrhoids are going to be very similar to the perianal fistula and abscess, where they're not part of the submucosa. They're part of the surface mucosa. They're not intestinal. They're different types of cells that cause the symptoms. So they should be considered separate conditions and not like lumped under the Crohn's disease term. They're separate conditions. And I think it's also funny, this is just how there's no logic in the GI community. Mouth ulcers will fall under the Crohn's disease diagnosis, but if somebody has stomach ulcers, like they just feel the need to like not lump it under the Crohn's disease term. Like it's really bizarre. There's literally no logic in the GI community. It literally drives me nuts. And I think you agree too if you're already doing your own research. So what's the cause of Crohn's disease? Many will say it is genetic, and there is some truth to that, but you got to look at it from the proper perspective. When we think about evolution, why would you inherit a disease that really decreases your survival chances? Like, that never made sense to me. How is it genetic? Why would I inherit something from my parents that makes me less likely to survive? Evolution's all about making it easier for me to survive. Wow, that makes no sense. Some people say that it's caused by the dysfunction of the immune system. Well, that's really not a cause. Like what causes the immune system to be dysfunctional? Like, that's the cause. That's just a random statement that's not rooted in logic. Some people say it's caused by a bad diet. Well, if that's true, then why do the kings of bad diets rarely have digestive issues? Like competitive eaters, they will hurt their jaw. Like their jaw will get dislocated from all the chewing. Like if a bodybuilder lifts too much weight, they hurt their arm or something like that. Most competitive eaters hurt their jaws, their chewing muscles, before they hurt their gut. And they eat horribly, terribly. And they put their gut under intense amount of stress, yet they almost never develop gut disease. Some people say it's caused by toxins. I know tons of people who smoke every day, and make it to the year, make it to 100 years old. I know some people who, there's a old grandma out there who drank 3 Dr. Peppers a day and lived well past 100. So, how's it toxins? Some people say it's caused by infection and not having a good gut microbiome. None of my family members have gut issues, and I've never seen them ever take a probiotic, and they take antibiotics at least once a year for something, and they don't have any digestive issues. And then the last one is stress. This was the last area I investigated, and there is a ton of science to support that it is caused by stress. And I just want to say it's actually caused by a traumatic event. And then the stress from that traumatic event is what puts the gut in and out of overdrive and causes our symptoms. And there's a ton of science to back this up, a ton of science. So this was a study they were doing on people with inflammation in their colon, and they kind of got psychologists involved, and the psychologists just laughed. They're like, you don't need my help. It's obvious that these people have mental health issues. And if you talk to the patients, if you would have talked to me and asked me hey, what was the stressful event that put your gut into overdrive? I'd be like, oh, nothing. And then if you would have talked to my family members, they would have been like, oh, he just got out of a breakup. Oh, he was just very stressed out about his school exams. Our biggest flares always start after a traumatic event. And usually the first time our symptoms start, it's when we resolve a traumatic event. And then the flares after that are during stressful periods. In this one book, it's called The Human Colon. The patients they were treating, their gut issues were so bad. Their intestines were literally hanging out of them, so they could look at their intestines and watch what it was doing. And so for this one guy, they'd sit there in silence for 10 minutes, and the guy would get all annoyed, and they would literally watch his intestines go from a pink color to a red color. They would watch his intestines move normally to moving rapidly. They would go from talking about the conflict so for this guy, his colitis got really bad after he got caught with a girl that his parents didn't approve of. And there was a police officer involved. When they started talking about that, as you can see here, the color got as red, it started to bleed, and then they changed the subject and the inflammation went down. Within minutes, within seconds, it changed. And they did this with multiple people. Dr. Crohn, in his book about stomach ulcers, this is literally the first sentence. It's the preface. It's the first sentence of his book about stomach ulcers. And he says, someone with stomach ulcers is stressed out all the time and they live a very stressful life. It's literally the first sentence. This is a recent lab study from 2019 where they just stress out rats and their gut becomes all sorts of messed up. Here's another lab study where they just stress people out and they just watch what their gut does as they're stressing them out and then taking them out of stress. This is a study that shows that antidepressants can help a lot with gut issues. This is another study just, stressing rats out totally messes up their gut microbiome. There's a ton of science out there that Crohn's and colitis starts after a traumatic event. A lot of it's buried, and it's almost like career suicide, if you're a GI doctor, but that's where it starts. And now what I hear a lot of people say is, my kid had it since birth. My kid got it at a very young age. Kids can't have trauma. I don't know. You should lose your parenting license. How can kids not be traumatized? In today's society, we do so many things to traumatize our kids, unknowingly, just because we weren't trained. The second they're born, they're taken away from the mother and put in a nursery all by itself. If an animal in the wild gets separated from their mother, they're goners. That's trauma for the baby not to be around their mothers. Then they go to the nursery, they go to daycare. And when you come back, they're bawling their eyes out. You don't get them the toy they want, they're bawling their eyes out. You don't hold them. You put them in their crib by themselves at night. They're crying their eyes out. that could be trauma. Now, and I'm not saying that all trauma causes gut disease. What I am saying is gut disease always starts after a traumatic event or around a traumatic event. We never know how our subconscious mind is going to experience a negative event. I grew up in an environment, I watched Lassie and stuff like this. So like dogs are a great thing. I love dogs. But somebody else who was bitten by a dog when they were little and their parents were always like, no, don't touch the dogs. They have rabies. Don't do it. Then, when they have a dog jump on them, they might freak out and be like, oh, get this piece of crap dog off of me. Oh, there's crap you need to get rid of? Okay, we're going to put the colon into overdrive and give you diarrhea. It all depends on how your subconscious mind reacts to the traumatic event. So the man who fleshed out all the details on how stress and these traumatic events affect the gut was Dr. Hammer, and his work is called German New Medicine. So in the 1980s and 1990s, Dr. Hammer created something called German New Medicine. And it's not like a pill you take, it's like a different way of looking at how your body works, like homeopathic medicine, allopathic medicine, Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine. He wanted to call it the new medicine because this is how we will be doing medicine at some point in time when people get their heads out of their butts. But for now, we call it German New Medicine, and it was created by Dr. Hammer. And this is like the scientific chart that shows you, like your small intestine responds to this type of traumatic event, your colon responds to that type of traumatic event, your lungs respond to that type of traumatic event. He mapped out every single organ in the body. And the cool thing that really sold me was that he could look at your brain CT scan and know exactly which disease you had. I got my CT scan done, and right where the impacts in the brain, like when we experience a stressful event, it's like, bah, like we're like a deer in headlights, like our brain just got shocked or something. You can actually see the impacts in the brain that these traumatic events had. So here's the inflammation in my small intestine right here. There's like a little ring right there. And then where the colon right there, there's a ring. And he mapped out every single organ. This is the brainstem we're looking at in this picture. But his work was verified by over 10 big institutions and over 100 doctors by now, but like through like official avenues, over 76. And he also did a really cool experiment where he took stomach ulcers, and he noticed that the stomach ulcers, this is like common knowledge, like when someone has colon cancer or stomach cancer, these tumors produce a ton of digestive juices. And Dr. Hammer tested these digestive juices, and it turns out it digested food like 10 times faster than normal digestive juices. So what's going on here? Like, what did he discover? They also did a study on his work in 1995 where they investigated 6,500 of his terminal cancer patients. These were people who, you're stage 4 cancer, go home and, start writing your will. You're not going to make it. Over 6,000 of them were still alive. That's like a 90% success rate with, like a 0% success rate with modern medicine. That's how amazing these principles are when you know how to use them correctly. So he mapped out everything in the body. If somebody had something going on in their pancreas, their gallbladder, or they had stomach ulcers, there would be an impact here. If somebody had lots of acne, there would be impacts in this part of the brain. So essentially how this works, and this is highly oversimplified. I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. Dr. Hammer was a German doctor, so he really mapped out all the details, which take a long time to learn properly, but I'm just trying to give this to you as fast as possible with the least amount of effort. It starts with a conflict shock. This is a traumatic event, and he had like 3 criteria for this. It's dramatic, it catches you off guard, and it leaves you feeling isolated, like you don't have any friends or family to help you solve this problem. And I would also like to add one more, which is you almost like can't respond. So like for me, like I had my video games taken away a lot from me when I was little. My parents, nobody could help me with it. It was dramatic, at least for me. And I also wasn't allowed to respond. If I yelled at my parents, I would just get in more trouble and have my video games taken away even longer. So the person's also in this situation where they're like, I just got to take it, I guess. So during the conflict active phase, in the small intestine, there will develop flat growths. These are cauliflower growths, but in the small intestine, it's flat growths, and they aid with absorption. So, I can't absorb video games. And then when I find the hidden controller, or, my parents finally give me my Nintendo back, then it gets resolved and the body no longer needs these high maintenance extra cells anymore, and it starts to get rid of them. And that's when, the gut pain starts, the diarrhea starts. The symptoms are always proportionate to the length and intensity of the conflict. So if it's a small conflict, it wasn't that bad, only a small amount of symptoms. But if it was like a big conflict, super dramatic, then it could produce a lot of symptoms. Now, when the cell removal is complete, it goes through a healing crisis. So there's like a response going in the brain. There's something, the relay's active, that like there's actual, like the ring will be sharp in the conflict active phase. Like when we're looking at this part of the brain, like right here, the ring will be sharp in the conflict active phase. And then when the conflict gets resolved, the brain and the organ and the intestines are healing, both of them. And so that's why we get a headache. That's why we get the fever. And that usually happens during the healing crisis. It did all the work, and now it's got to take out all the trash. That might last for me, it lasts usually like a day or two. It depends which organ's involved. Sometimes you don't even notice the healing crisis. They're so tiny. And then after that, it's smooth sailing. It goes into the scarring phase and kind of cleans up everything. Now, where this turns into Crohn's disease is the conflict is always reoccurring. My parents are always taking away my video games. So the conflict's always off and on, off and on, off and on. Or there's a lot of PTSD triggers, or Dr. Hammer liked to call them tracks. These are subconscious reminders of the conflict. One of my tracks was, you see this in movies all the time, and the best movie that does this is Shutter Island with Leonardo DiCaprio. Every time he sees fire, he starts to hallucinate like crazy. Every time he sees water, he starts to get super sick. And he's not consciously aware of this. Not even the psychiatrists in the movies are aware of this. But the editors and the directors and the filmmakers, it's a beautiful movie, especially when you look at it from the German New Medicine lens. Like when soldiers come back from war, every time they hear a loud bang, they get all freaked out. Or maybe every time they get into a car, they start having a panic attack, and you're like, what's the problem? Like, why won't you get into the car? Well, last time I got into a car, we drove over a landmine. And like the primal part of my brain seizes up my muscles and won't let me get into that car. But the way that we experience this traumatic event, instead of seizing up, the best solution is to give us diarrhea. We got to get rid of this crap. What does diarrhea do? Is to get rid of the crap. If you're constipated, we got to hold on to something precious. This is how we need to start to look at it. My first conflict shock, I probably had before that, but this is like one that I really remember, like my symptoms, like as a child getting bad, is we had some family friends over, and one of them, they had a daughter, and my brother liked her. I have two younger brothers, and so the middle one really liked her and wanted to impress her. So what he did was he jumped off the roof of her house and he broke his arm. And when my dad found out, he was upset that, he was upset with all of us. And he said, oh, that's it. I'm taking away Nintendo for the whole summer. The Nintendo 64. So like Nintendo 64, like literally just came out that year. We had just moved to a new neighborhood. Usually my brothers were like, my partners in crime, and we would like, like at least I had them to like watch my, like watch the door to see if my parents were coming so we could like play. We were like drug addicts. But now that, I couldn't even trust them because now they were like part of the issue. So yeah, he had a broken arm, that was taken care of and that was fine. But that's when my symptoms, my Crohn's symptoms really started to get bad. And that's really when I went into middle school, and my parents were getting on my case to take school more seriously. The school we moved to was harder for no reason. The first school I went to, 100 to 90 was an A. And then in this new school I went to, 100 to a 95 was an A. And then we also started playing hockey. And the nearest hockey rink was like 45 minutes away if there was no traffic. So like literally within a short time, it was almost impossible for me to play video games, and my life became, I know that most people like that's not trauma, but to me, it was awful. It's all relative. So my gut was constantly in and out of overdrive for years and years and years. Up until high school and even college, my parents were yelling at us to like get off the computer and stuff like that. But my worst flare was after a breakup a few years after college. That was like by far my worst flare. So not only could I wanted to digest video games, but I couldn't digest. I wanted to digest, girls, but I couldn't. And my gut just kept going in and out of overdrive. From my lab reports, I know at least my stomach, my small intestine, my large intestine, I had at least like 3 or 4 different conflict shocks that put 3 or 4 different parts of my digestive system into overdrive. I think it was stomach, gallbladder, small intestine, large intestine, perianal ducts. Like there was a lot of things going on. And I also used to have horrible acne. Terrible. Now let's talk a little bit more about tracks and PTSD triggers. These are subconscious reminders of the traumatic event. So anytime I felt like somebody was doing something stupid that inconvenienced my life, I would get symptoms. They were crap I want to get rid of. So somebody's driving slow. Like, come on, learn to drive. Why are you being an idiot? Oh, there's crap you want to get rid of, but you can't? Diarrhea. Somebody at work is doing something that's going to cause me to have to do more work. Oh, no. Oh, we'll just give you diarrhea to help you out. That's what the little guy driving my brain is doing. There was many times I was also put at the table as a kid and was like forced to eat vegetables, which I didn't like. I'd bite it and go like gag. So anytime, even up until adulthood, like my girlfriend would be cooking steamed vegetables and just the smell of it, and I wouldn't even have an emotional reaction. I wouldn't go, oh my God, why are you cooking green beans? You know about my childhood trauma. None of that reaction. My reaction was just like, green beans, and go back to do whatever I was doing. Didn't make a fuss about it. Just the smell would trigger diarrhea. And it wasn't until I became consciously aware of this connection and kind of got goosebumps. Like, oh, wow, that's why I get diarrhea every time I smell green vegetables. Whoa, goosebumps. Like I get goosebumps, cold chills. And ever since then, when I smell vegetables, like I don't get the urge to go anymore. Anytime I left food on my plate, eat the food on your plate. I don't want to. Eat it or you can't play video games. I'd been in that situation so many times. And like anytime I left food on my plate, even as an adult, and I wasn't even like, I felt like this tinge of guilt, like, oh man, I didn't finish my whole meal. I'd leave like a little, some stuff on there that I didn't want. I would get symptoms until I made that realization. I don't understand the science, but making that realization tends to break the reaction a lot of the times. I would just hear like the garbage bag, you know, and that was a subconscious reminder of my mom like yanking me off the video games to take out the trash. Just making that real, like I'd hear somebody rustling the garbage bin, and I'd have to go to like I was barely conscious of that. And then another time I would always have to go to the bathroom was when I was in the grocery store. Like every time I went down the candy aisle, or every time I went to the cashier, like I'd always have to go. Like right when I get to the line, like I'd have to go to the bathroom. I'm like, what is? I'm happy. I got everything that I wanted from the store. What's going on? And until I made this realization of how many times as a kid was I in the grocery store and I wasn't allowed to have a certain candy. I wasn't allowed to have a certain food. I wasn't allowed to have gum at the exit. And it was always because of, the way that at least I saw it was like my parents' stupid rules, my mom's stupid rules. And I know I sound like a brat, and I am, but that's how I experienced as a kid. We kind of have to be a detective, like a logical detective about this, using our symptoms as like an anchor on where to investigate. Because the biggest mistake that I see a lot of people do is they will just analyze all the stress in their life and they'll get nowhere because they need to anchor it around the traumatic event that put their gut into overdrive, or at least like when they get symptoms in the now. So if you have diarrhea 10 times a day, that's like 10 opportunities to find these PTSD triggers. And you don't have to like go to Mount Fuji and go visit the Buddhist monks there and, never experience a negative emotion ever again. It's not possible. You just have to make these realizations a lot of the times. So this is somebody else that I helped. His name is Mehdi, and he had a pretty bad case of Crohn's disease. How many times were you going to the bathroom before you started G&M?
Before it was like 2-3 times, but it was all diarrhea. But my main issue was pain, horrible pain, After a week, my symptoms gone completely. Everything was under control.
So Mehdi's conflict shock, he had the country that he comes from, he had to, like, you're forced to serve in the military for like 2 years. And a lot of the times in the military, if like one of your comrades do something stupid, then the whole squad gets punished. So one weekend he had like this big thing planned that he's going to go back and see his mom and see his girlfriend, but he couldn't because one of his comrades did something stupid and he got stuck there, and the whole weekend, sucks. So he had his first flare shortly after he was done with the military, like after he retired from the military. He only had to serve for a year or two. So when he was discharged from the military, that's when he had his first big flare. Mehdi and me were very similar, where, we usually had symptoms where we were like really annoyed with the people around us who were just, oh, you're being stupid. You're not doing your job right. Can't you see that's just making more work for, like, he kind of had like that, or like when he was like really stressed out at work, like that's when his symptoms got really bad. But he also had some like weird PTSD triggers. Like he won a gift card at work and the boss didn't give it to him. Never gave it to him. And he noticed whenever he paid with a gift card, he'd have diarrhea. And I never use gift cards, but I guess he uses a lot of gift cards. So he was able to notice this. And, that was one we had a good laugh about. But I did a lot of diets too, but he did a lot of diets. And when you perceive food as, oh, gluten's toxic, oh, this and that's toxic because I read a book or I watched a YouTube video, or, oh, I had some, he got out of the military and he probably celebrated with some cake. Oh man, the night of my first flare, I had cake. I just never having cake again because it causes Crohn's flares. But when you realize just having this realization, wow, I had cake on the first night of my flare. It wasn't the cake. I had cake a million times before. The traumatic event was that one weekend where I couldn't go home because of some idiot in my squad. And my resolution was, when I got out of the military, okay, now we can see the whole timeline forming here. Now, a lot of people, when I show them this, they're like, what's the therapy? Why don't you tell me what to do to get better? Please tell me. You're teasing me. This is the therapy. Making this timeline. Most of you are going to go, I can't remember anything. I can't even remember what I ate yesterday. Like, you really, like, it takes it depends. It depends on, for me, it took a lot of effort because I had symptoms since middle school, since childhood. But if you're somebody who it started in your 20s or only started a few years ago, like, these are fresh memories at the top of the brain, easy to find. They're not buried in the subconscious. So I'll show you one more case study, and then I'll kind of go into how I help people. They all went through my 13-day protocol, where each day I have like worksheets, and I teach you the basics of German new medicine. I teach you the basics of how a traumatized mind works. One of the interesting things about trauma is it makes you delusional. It's like, I'm not stressed out. Don't tell me I'm stressed out. I'm not an angry, frustrated person. You're like literally like yelling at the person. Like, they're so easily, like, usually people with Crohn's and colitis, they're so emotionally sensitive. I was too, more on the anger, frustrated side. And we're very good at hiding it. And when we hide it and when we repress it, a lot of these lab studies and the doctors, doing these lab studies, they always said it's like they're repressing their anger, and their intestines are taking over that job to help deal with the stress. So this is Tony. He is somebody else I help get better from Crohn's disease.
Probably a year of no symptoms on the carnivore diet.
Yeah, and you had a very stress-free life at that time too.
And then I returned back to my old life of full-time corporate work. And I think within a month, all my symptoms had come back. And I was running to the bathroom upwards of 6 times, sometimes 8 times a day.
And that was even when you were doing carnivore.
Yeah, I was eating the same thing, which really puzzled me. It's been really cool to just be able to eat most things that I haven't eaten in a long time.
He's got milk right there.
I was just thinking earlier this morning that I've had more burgers in the last 2 weeks than I've had in the last probably 10 years. And then the other thing that I've really, really gotten back into, which never thought would happen, was milkshakes, like actual full dairy milkshake. It's a real gift to be able to walk out the house and know that I could eat anything, anywhere.
So Tony's conflict shock was with his mother. And it was always like this. He had this attitude like, I wasn't getting respect. I think he did really well on a test or something like that. And he showed his parents, specifically his mom, and she just didn't care. And before, she was like giving him a hard time, like, you need to do good in school, and you did do good in school, and like she just didn't care. And respect is also, he's from a culture where like respect is like, like, yeah, you better respect me. It's like a very important thing in his culture. The first resolution, he had symptoms since childhood, so it was a little difficult figuring out which event was which, but we dug long enough, and it turns out, one day she finally like recognized him for his hard work, but this was constantly on and off. She, sometimes she wasn't respecting him, sometimes she was, on and off. And what just wasn't his mother, it was his teachers, it was his friends, it was his other family members. And then when he got into the business world, the customers are not respecting me. My coworkers are not respecting me. The project manager's not respecting me. My boss isn't respecting me. Just on and off. For a long time, he was doing pretty well on like the carnivore diet, but he also wasn't working. He like took a year off. And then the second he got a job and he was in a stressful environment, the symptoms came right back. But when he went through my protocol, he was able to work in that stressful environment and not have symptoms. For a lot of you, like, most of your food intolerances will go away just by watching this video, especially if you believe it. And Tony did, but he reacted to dairy for a while. He's like, I know all food is safe. I know it's caused by trauma, but for some reason I keep reacting to dairy. One day he realized they immigrated and they didn't, their family didn't have a lot of money, and he really liked like this cheese snack thing that was, like a little expensive. He like really wanted it. He like begged for it from his parents, and his mom was like, no, you can't have it. Stop whining. Da 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 da. It was like a big thing that he remembered. And it was like this dairy cheese snack thing. And once he just having that realization, he was able to eat dairy and not have symptoms. And, they just simply went through my 13-day protocol. I remember Tony saying like he only got to day 7 of the 13 days and, he was fine. So here are the treatments for Crohn's disease. And we're going to go over some of the holistic treatments, the modern medicine treatments, and most importantly, the German new medicine way of approaching this. So drugs. Now, most of the drugs they use to treat Crohn's disease, there's nothing special about them. They are all stimulants. Like I remember when I was on Remicade for a year, they're like, oh, well, Remicade is for sure going to work. And did that for a year, up the dose, did absolutely nothing. Nothing. And then the doctor was like, well, okay, well, like, let's try another biologic. And I was like researching them, and I'm like, the mechanism, like how it's acting on the body is the exact same mechanism. They are just hardcore stimulants. That is all they are. They do regulate the immune system, but not like they are. It's like literally like drinking a super powerful Coke or Red Bull. It's like that is like literally all they are. And that can affect your symptoms. It's not a cure, but it can affect your symptoms if we understand what's going on. If you look at the headache medicines, you go to the drugstore, they're stimulants. They have caffeine in it. They have steroids in it. They are stimulants. Now, if you take a stimulant and you have stomach ulcers, it's going to make the stomach ulcers worse because it's a conflict active symptom. But if you have Crohn's and you take a stimulant, a lot of people say they feel better after having a soda, after having a Coke because of the caffeine in it, or after having coffee, because this is like this is conflict active, super sympathetic activity. You either have medications that are uppers, which are the steroids and the biologics and the chemotherapy, and then you have medicines that are downers, the main one being morphine and relaxants. If you take a stimulant when you are in this part right here, it lessens what's going on right here. That's essentially what's going on. But we also need to consider if you're like loaded up on stimulants, with the you're washing down your stimulants with a side of coffee, what's that doing to our psyche? It's probably making us hyper aware of our PTSD triggers. But somebody might also take these pills and believe their doctor. I'll believe everything he says. He has a piece of paper on his wall that says he knows what he's doing. If somebody truly believes that, then that might switch something in their brain where they believe all food is safe and they believe that they're going to get better and the stars align and the conflict's not off and on, and they're not haunted by their conflict. Then it might appear that the drug is working. But, I never believed my drug was working because no one ever explained logically to me. Like, it never made sense. Like, how do you know this drug works? You don't even know what the root cause is. I never, ever had faith in my drugs, ever. So they really didn't do much for me and my conflicts. On the surface, like, super dramatic, but I was, like, angry and frustrated, like, literally, like, all the time. And the success rates with biologics are very low. 50% almost have no response, and then up to 80% never achieve remission. So it has like a 20% success rate. and maybe 50% of the people see any improvement. Like, it's like, it's terrible. People who use these treatments, how can you consider them experts? In my book, that is the definition of incompetence, not of an expert. So the other drugs are antibiotics. So what's going on here from a microbial level is during the conflict active phase, extra bacteria and fungi come out of our own cells, like Candida, E. coli, C. diff, and they're actually dormant during the conflict active phase. They're not doing anything. They're just there. They're hanging out. But when the conflict gets resolved, these bacteria and fungi aid with the removal of these extra gut cells, and then they go away, if we're not subconsciously haunted by the conflict. So if we take antibiotics while this is happening, there's less bacteria and fungi ripping away at the flesh on our gut. So that can help reduce symptoms. It's not addressing the root cause, but it can help reduce symptoms. Now, I meet a lot of people who insist, antibiotics is what caused their Crohn's disease. Well, it's like, well, what made you take antibiotics in the first place? Something happened. You were having symptoms before you had antibiotics. And I know a ton of people who take antibiotics a few times a year, and they never have any probiotics, and they are absolutely fine. The holistic community, makes, antibiotics sound like they're the worst things on planet Earth, but they're really not that bad when you understand all the puzzle pieces and how it goes together from a German new medicine perspective. Now, there are surgeries, and German new medicine is not against using surgeries, especially if we do it intelligently. So Dr. Burrell Crohn's talks about this quite a bit. He did a lot. He found a lot of success with resections. So let's say somebody comes in and they only have inflammation like right here, and that's it. If we just snip that out and then put it back together, like there really, unless something goes wrong, like there's really not many complications. So somebody will be still experiencing the conflict. They'll be experiencing their PTSD triggers, and the brain will send a signal to the gut to freak out and cause inflammation and all this stuff. But it goes to a dead end. And there's no response because it's not there. There's nobody on the other end of the line, and so we don't get symptoms. So Dr. Burrell Crohn's noticed a lot of success with that. But what do you do if somebody has inflammation everywhere or their whole colon is inflamed? We're going to cut everything out? Like, it's not really, I had inflammation everywhere. Are you going to cut everything out? Like, what are you going to, what are you going to do? And there are a lot of people who get their colon cut out, and this makes me nauseous just looking at it. But there's called the J pouch and the W pouch, the J pouch probably being the most popular one. But essentially what they're doing is they're going to cut out your colon and just throw it away, throw it in the trash. And then they take the last part of your small intestine here, and then they fold it onto each other, and they cut open the middle of it, and they staple the sides of it. So they're kind of making you like a Frankenstein colon. And then they wonder why it doesn't work very well. Intestinal muscles do not like to be cut. It's amazing that it even works. A lot of the times they won't do that. They will just remove your whole colon and give you a bag. The bag's on the outside, the bag's on the inside here. A lot of the times they will, do the bag right here, the ostomy bag, where they cut this and they leave the colon in and see if it repairs itself without having food go through it. The problem isn't food going through it. The colon doesn't need a rest. It's an organ that's like the heart. It's just designed to beat all day long, all night long without stopping. It's supposed to work a lot. It's designed to work a lot. The issue is even if the ileum, if the small intestine and the large intestine are not connected, if you are still experiencing the conflict that put your colon into overdrive, it will still go in and out of overdrive, even if it's not connected to the rest of your intestines. I've helped many people who are like literally days away from getting one of these surgeries, and they're absolutely fine. They're living a normal life. They eat whatever foods they want, and they're fine. And they were literally days away from getting one of these operations. So when people finally get fed up with their GI doctor after years of trying drugs that don't work, usually the first thing they're going to try are diets. And again, my first logical argument, I did diets for years and years and years. So my first logical argument to this is, why do almost none of the competitive eaters have digestive issues if it's caused by bad diet? And most people go on these diets. Like, I remember I followed something called the Weston A. Price diet for a long time, which is an ancestral diet. This dentist, Dr. Weston A. Price, he observed what healthy primitive populations were eating, and they were so healthy they had a 1% cavity rate. And so I followed this diet for a long time, and I remember I went to one of the conventions, and there was this woman there who, she didn't look too great. She had bad skin. She was kind of skinny. She didn't look healthy. And she'd been doing the diet for 10 years. And at this convention, everyone's like making the food perfectly. The bread's made from ancient grains. It's sourdough. It's whole grain. The grains are sprouted. Everything's perfect. The butter is raw. It's from A2 cows. The cows never had antibiotics. Like, literally perfect. The food could not get any cleaner. The food could not get any healthier. And she literally could not have a piece of bread with butter on it. And I was like, so I guess this doesn't work? What's going on? But my food allergies did not start until I started going on these diets. The first time that I had a violent reaction to food was when I went on the specific carbohydrate diet, which literally for like 100, like the book is like when you sit down and you actually read it, it's like literally ridiculous. It's like, this diet, you'll start to see like improvement in like 2 years, and you can't have any starches because the starches feed the bad bacteria and fungi. That's like the main premise of the book. And, I really believe this. And after reading that book, I was like, grains are the devil, I can't believe so many people are allowed to eat grains. I can't believe, this is legal. And then my birthday rolled around, and I was like, and my whole being was like, I need to have bread with butter on it. I'm going to go crazy. Like imagine you're in the desert and you're dying of thirst. Like, I need a glass of water, and yet I just read the stupid book that said water's the devil. My body was dying for a piece of bread with butter on it. It was my birthday. I wanted a piece of birthday cake so bad, and I ate it, and oh my God, I got so sick. But I have had literally thousands of pieces of toast and thousands of birthday cakes in my life, and I never had symptoms like that until I read this crazy book that put these crazy beliefs into my head. And literally just discovering German new medicine and seeing the brain CT scans and watching a video like this one, and like literally like 90% of my food intolerances went away. So diets are actually an extremely horrible treatment for things like Crohn's and colitis. Now, it's good to get more nutrients into you. But becoming psycho about food and becoming ultra religious about, what goes into your body and freaking out every time you have a crumb of gluten, this is going to do a ton of damage to your gut. And public service announcement, the vegan diet is the absolute worst diet you can go on. Animals that are herbivores have very complex digestive systems. Take a cow, for example. They eat all day long, And then they have to chew their food all day long. They have 4 chambers in their stomach. They, even when it goes through the stomach, they have to vomit it back up and chew on it. Like, there's, eating plants is fine, but when your gut is hurt, we want the most nutrient dense, easy to digest foods as possible. And most of them are animal based, they're animal products. That's why carnivore animals have a much simpler digestive system than herbivore animals. Like, the digestive machinery is so heavy that there are almost no purely herbivore birds. Like, they don't exist. And the ones that do exist, they almost can't fly because the digestive machinery is so heavy. And this book right here, it's called Self-Healing Crohn's and Colitis, and it promotes like these crazy potato only, banana only diets, focus on nothing but the vegan diet and demonizing all the other foods on planet Earth. This is the most dangerous thing you can do in treating Crohn's disease, so please avoid this at all costs. Now, what are some of the best foods you can use while you're in a Crohn's flare or, trying to get yourself more nutrients into your diet? So dairy is great. Now, I know dairy has a bad reputation, but, 100 years ago, there used to be something called like the raw milk cure, where they would just have people drink nothing but like a gallon to a gallon and a half of raw milk every single day for like 1 to 2 months. Now, a big part of that therapy, a lot of people do that therapy and they don't get better, but what they stated in the book was that bed rest and not talking to anybody was super important. And that's that, help the person resolve their, not be under any stress. So dairy is big. It is so easy to digest that a baby's gut can handle it just fine. And if you are reacting to dairy, then it's one, because, you watched a YouTube video or read a book or somebody told you it was bad and you believed it, or it's somehow related to a past traumatic event. Tony, for example, his parents wouldn't let him have that cheese. A lot of kids are, for me, like, I would eat cereal. I was a weird kid. So I would eat cereal, right? And then I wouldn't drink the milk at the end, and, I would get in trouble for that. Some kids like just don't like to drink milk, and the parents would yell at them, or the lunch lady would yell at them, or a teacher would yell at them. I hear a lot of stories like that. So, if you're reacting to dairy, how is it related to the past? Like a lot of kids, like, they aren't allowed to have the ice, go run after the ice cream truck. They're not allowed to have ice cream, and, they throw a fit. So the most important thing for our survival straight out of the womb, what is it? Like, besides air and mom, it's milk. And almost our whole generation, like, we should be breastfed for, like 3 to 4 years. Like, that's what it normally is in like tribal societies. Most kids are, being taken off the breast 3 months in if they're lucky. So, there's a lot of areas for dairy to become like trauma. But it's a very easy to digest food, has all the essential nutrients in it. So another food that gets demonized a lot is sugar. Somebody with Crohn's disease, their body is burning through a ton of nutrients, so much nutrients, and the nutrients that does make it into them, a lot of it goes straight into the toilet with diarrhea. Fruit juices and even soda, that sugar gets absorbed in your stomach. So at the bare minimum, at least your body is getting energy and, a little bit of nutrients depending on what drink it is. And a lot of people, oh, I heard sugar's bad, so I'm just not going to have sugar. It literally powers your brain. It's like the second that I drink a sugary drink, I can feel my brain come back online because it's powered by glucose. It's powered by sugar. So fruit juices are an amazing food that's often demonized. Liver is another great food, not the tastiest, but that's the most nutrient-dense food on the planet. Meat is really good. The body is going through a ton of protein. The more tender, the better. So a lot of seafoods are super tender. Think about it. Like most things like salmon and sushi, on tuna. Like, they could be eaten raw. They're so tender. Like, you can't eat steak raw. Like, you could have steak tartare raw, but like, it's like, it needs to be prepared a certain way. It needs to be paired with certain things. It's like, it's tough. Like, in order to make beef good, it needs to go through like a lot. To make beef like as tender as salmon, like, you literally have to like cook it, like slow roast cook it for like 6 hours. Like, it takes a lot of energy, like physical energy, whether it comes from your cooking equipment or from your gut. So when we're having meat, it's good to take into consideration like how tough the meat is. And usually the bigger the animal, the tougher the meat. So cows are, and I'm not saying avoid cows, but like, if you're going to have cow meat, try to prepare it in a way where it's more tender and easier on your stomach. Mashed potatoes, I mean, with butter or sour cream, that pretty much melts in your mouth. That's a very good way to pack on calories and to get just energy going through your system. The easiest to digest type of bread is sourdough bread. If you're reacting to gluten violently, then you need to be careful bringing gluten back into your diet. And I do have some videos where I focus exclusively on gluten intolerance, and I show you all the craziness behind that, but it's actually very easy to fix. Jello, you could make Jello a more healthy way where you sweeten it with honey or a more natural type of sugar that has some of the more nutrients in it, and that gelatin will give you some protein. And then another thing we can add to the list here are eggs. And I know eggs are, a popular allergen, but I remember as a kid, if my dad made the eggs too runny, I would cry and scream like, no, it's not cooked. And eggs are just like in all foods nowadays, and it's just a popular allergen. So it's easy for your brain to label it as bad. And when something bad enters you, so, it's something toxic and bad. Oh my God, what should we do? Diarrhea, let's get it out as fast as possible. Fish eggs are also another amazing food. Now, these foods will not cure your gut, but in order to build, your gut is going in and out of overdrive due to that traumatic event. And these foods just give your body more nourishment. Now, if a lot of people bark back at me like, you know nothing about gut health, like you don't focus up on diet at all. I have seen people follow a diet perfectly and be at death's door. Like, they literally like can't do anything, and they're doing all the diet stuff perfectly. And the second they get the traumatic event under control, they do the timeline, they start to see things through the German new medicine perspective. Like, they become a functioning person again. They can actually live their, they might not be 100% perfect, but they can actually live their life again. No amount of nutrients, even if we were to eject it into your bloodstream, no amount of nutrients can make up for the amount of damage that happens to your gut from it going in and out of overdrive. Now, some of the worst foods for somebody with gut issues, and these foods are bad because they cause actual injury to your gut, or they're just hard to digest. So spicy foods. Now, you might have more tolerance than, because of your culture and you grew up eating these foods. But, if you put like hot spices in your eye, like you go blind or it really hurts. They make pepper spray from a chemical in hot peppers. So I'd maybe take it easy on the spicy foods. Raw nuts and seeds. This is like the cool, healthy thing to do. Like, eat raw nuts like you're a squirrel. When Native Americans prepared nuts, they went through a crazy cooking process. They used to make acorn bread, the Native Americans, or it used to be like a thing, and they would let the acorns sit in a stream for like a couple of weeks. Like, they did all sorts of crazy things. Like, they require so much processing in order to, like, this, when you eat some nuts, you're like, oh, that feels heavy. Yeah, because they're so hard to break down, and they require a lot of cooking in order to make them tasty and, not just, it's like a lot of like, if you look at it chemically, like what's going on, I could get all nerdy about it. There is a lot There's a lot of chemical reactions that need to happen in order to assimilate those nutrients. You can either do that in the kitchen or you can do that in your gut. And whole grains and nuts. When we first get diagnosed with gut issues, it's like, oh, I'm just going to eat healthy. So instead of eating white bread, I'm going to eat whole grains. So whole grain, it'd be better if you got sourdough whole grain. But if you're eating that and it just, oh man, it feels heavy, like I need to take a nap after you eat that, it's because whole grains have more nutrients in them, but it requires more work for it to be digested. I would avoid raw vegetables. They're not the worst thing in the world, but they would be a lot easier to digest if they were cooked. But again, you have to do this by feel. Some people love eating salads, and when they eat salads, they feel great, and that's great. I don't like eating salads. I don't enjoy it. But if you can eat a salad and feel great, that's okay. That's awesome. But on paper, raw vegetables are hard to digest. If you run it through a juicer, they're super easy to digest. If you cook them, they're a lot easier to digest. So, start to have that little, digestion equation going on in your head. Just because some whack job said, it's here on the food period, it must be healthy. It tastes horrible, it must be healthy. That's literally the logic of most health experts nowadays. It tastes bad, so it's really healthy. Because being healthy is all about suffering. That's like the way we look at health. That's like the average theme people follow today in the health community. When people try to go gluten-free, they're doing these whole grain breads, they're doing nut breads and almond bread. It's just they're not tasty, and they're just very tough to digest. Alcohol, it's not the best thing. It's not the worst thing. Think about how many alcoholics, drink every single night and they don't have digestive issues. So, and alcohol is, usually involved with trauma. Somebody gets drunk and then they do something stupid. So maybe the alcohol is related to the trauma somehow. Maybe having a glass of wine every night will help you chill out. Maybe having a glass of beer every night will help you chill out. I wouldn't have it during a flare, but it's not causing your gut issues. Gluten and dairy have a horrible reputation nowadays, but they are perfectly fine to eat. If you're reacting to them, then either you consciously believe that they're bad because you watch too many YouTube videos, or it's somehow related to a traumatic event, or you had it right before your first flare and you're blaming those foods. And candy and soda, not the most nourishing foods in the world, but if you have a soda, at the bare minimum, we at least know you're getting calories into you, and that is better than nothing. Yeah, there's better foods to eat than candy, but you really, this is almost required for getting better. It's not demonizing normal foods. If you want to follow a diet, the best diet to follow is the Weston A. Price diet. There's the Weston A. Price Foundation run by Sally Fallon, and she's written a few books. This diet has the most logic in it. You just need to be watch out because there's this theme, in this community of that, if you eat bad, you're going to grow a second head. If you have too many toxins, you're going to get disease. They don't understand disease from the German New Medicine perspective. If you demonize foods, even bad foods, cooked in vegetable oils and all this stuff, it's going to do more harm than good. So I'll just give you some quick examples of trigger foods that some of my people were avoiding. So one guy was allergic to red meat, and essentially what happened to him is he was going to be a professional football player or something like that. He got hurt in a game, and when he woke up from surgery, the doctor told him, hey, your career's over, and, that was the shock. And then a few months later, he found a new job, found a new calling, he got a new job, and, his first paycheck came in, and he went and he celebrated by buying a big, nice steak and a milkshake. And that's when he had his first flare. And he blamed it on the red meat and on the milkshake, on the dairy. And until he made that once he made that realization, he was able to eat these foods without issue. One person was allergic to pizza, and it was strange because he could have bread by itself. He could have pasta by itself. He could have pepperoni by itself. He could have pasta that was had all the same ingredients in it, the tomato and all that stuff, and it didn't react to it. Pizza, react. And then one day he realized back in college, he took his friends out for pizza and he paid for everything. And then one of his friends wanted to take home the leftovers, even though he didn't pay. And he's like, no, I paid. I'm taking the leftover home. Like, what's wrong with you? And just making that and they got into like a big fight, and just making that realization, symptoms went away. So if you're reacting to a certain food, you need to believe that all food is safe and that it's caused by a traumatic event. And, we need to find the PTSD triggers and find the traumatic event. And, we're going to go over that treatment in a little bit. But that's like your brain. I don't know why it's so crazy that your brain controls your whole body. Your brain controls your gut. There's this crazy idea in the holistic community that your gut controls your brain. It's just complete nonsense. Another big holistic thing is the detox. This is fine, but toxins are not intelligent enough to put your gut in and out of overdrive. They're just not. They don't have brains. They're just toxic. And usually you have diarrhea and it gets thrown out and then you're fine. Some people are going to blame mold and toxins and all that stuff. I've done a ton of detox therapies. None of them worked until I started getting the trauma and stuff under control. Many people will think it's caused by an infection or, a bad gut microbiome. So we need to fix it by killing infection and taking probiotics. And Dr. Burrell Crohn's thought this for a long time. He thought it was caused by tuberculosis bacteria or MAP. You hear people talk about MAP bacteria causing gut issues. MAP is just another alias for tubercular bacteria in the gut. So he did some experiments. He would take bad bacteria from somebody with, Crohn's and colitis, and he would put it into guinea pigs and rabbits and mice and rats and stuff like that, and their gut was fine. They never, ever developed gut issues. So, you couldn't catch it. You couldn't catch it by giving that bad bacteria to somebody. And then he would take, he also did fecal matter transplants. He would take healthy bacteria and fungi and put it into a bad gut, and these people would never get better. I've seen so many people take fecal matter transplants, and they never get better. They never get better, and they do them for like years. So I took this a step further, and I actually bought Candida from a lab. You can buy it online for like $20, and I grew it on pieces of bread. And I tested different antifungals on it. I tested like frankincense oil, and, I'd have to use quite a bit of frankincense oil to like make sure it didn't grow. But if I just used 1 drop of oregano oil, essential oil, I don't know why it says 2 or 4, but I remember just using 1 drop of oregano essential oil, and like Candida did not grow at all on this bread. And so I kind of like took these principles. I was like, all right, so if I give somebody, oregano oil, and, they take that, like a drop of that a day for like a month, it's like literally impossible for bad bacteria and fungi to grow in their gut. And then we like smash down tons and tons and tons of probiotics. Like, they have to get better. They cannot have an infection. And there was like so many people I did this to, and none of them got better. They didn't get better. They didn't show any improvements. And then they start the trauma treatment. They start figuring out the trauma way, and they're like better in like a week. They gain all their weight back in like a month or 2. And there's tons of science today saying just stressing out a rat will completely change their gut microbiome. And Dr. Hammer said, he had the rule where the bacteria, it's called the 4th biological law of German New Medicine, where bacteria, fungi, mycobacteria, bacteria, and fungi, they assist with the post-conflict resolution phase. They assist with the cell removal or the cell restoration. So the next treatment you might consider, me telling you that it's caused by a traumatic event, is going to see a psychiatrist or a mental health therapist. And where that might help, they are not trained to look at things in this way. So this is from a book where GI doctors work together with therapists to help these people get their conflicts under control, to stop having their gut go in and out of overdrive. So these little lines right here are how many interviews these people had. And this is when the therapists knew what they were doing, and they were in contact with the GI doctors, figuring this out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 20 sessions over 2 years to get this under control. And this is when they air quotes, that's crappy results, if you ask me. That's way too slow. I help people get better a lot faster than this. It's not, a lot of the times, it's not about coming to peace with the conflict. It's about bringing the conflict to consciousness, so the subconscious mind isn't giving that task to your small intestine, to your colon to deal with. That's just how it is. Sometimes we need to deal with the conflict linked, a lot of the time they just go in and they start trying to address all the stress in your life. You might have 10 things in your life stressing you out, but only 1 or 2 of those things is putting your gut into overdrive. So, if you were to do this today, 20 sessions, that's at least, $2, $3, $4, $5,000, depending on who your therapist is. And again, they are not, most therapists can't even give you a proper definition for what an emotion is, yet alone understanding the principles of German New Medicine. Here's another case that was a little bit more successful, but it took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 sessions over the course of about a month. That's not bad, but that's like $1,000, $2,000. And most therapists today, they are not trained to look at the human mind this way. They're trained to do just talk about what makes you sad. So this is what I do differently in my 13-day protocol. So where are the symptoms coming from? So in my experience, 25% of our symptoms are coming around beliefs around our illness and around food. So what do I mean by that? So you read Grain Brain and now you believe gluten's bad. Now you believe dairy's bad. That belief that you believe all food is bad, seed oils is bad, every time you consume those foods, the body's going to want to get rid of it as fast as possible. We change that belief and you stop reacting to it, unless it's linked to a past traumatic event. A lot, just not believing food is bad anymore, literally will cut someone's symptoms in half by 25%, especially if they're down the holistic rabbit hole and they're on some weird diet. And then a lot of people are very stressed out about their disease. Oh, I'm never, a lot of professional athletes have this and they're I can't compete at the highest level anymore. I'm doomed. My life's just going to be horrible for the rest of my life. When you learn what the body is actually doing and that there is a solution, all of a sudden you're oh, wow, my life's not over, and you feel better. And the symptoms and the sickness, they make the original conflict that put your gut into overdrive almost worse a lot of the time. So just knowing that you're just not going to have symptoms randomly and that there's actually a pattern behind it and that there's something that we can do about it can really help out with symptoms. So a lot of helping somebody get better is changing the beliefs inside your head. And the only way I know how to do that is, you have to listen to what listen to what I say, listen to the videos. And I have exercises on the workbook to help put this information, overwrite these silly beliefs from, holistic and modern medicine that are making us sick. The other part of the therapy is finding your conflict shock. And even Dr. Hammer himself is this is the therapy, finding the conflict shock, finding that traumatic event. In that program, I take you through tons of different case studies so you can get a good idea of what we're looking for. And then another big part of, and by the time somebody gets to that, usually their symptoms are like 75% gone, 50, 75% gone. And then there's the subconscious reminders of the conflict shock, which Dr. Hammer called tracks. I like to call them PTSD triggers. But dealing with those, and the way that we deal with those is, it's very easy with diarrhea, because the second you get diarrhea, you experience crap you want to get rid of, but you can't. For most of you, it can be different depending on the situation. And then how does that relate to the original conflict shock? Oh, every time I smell vegetables, I have diarrhea. Oh, well, okay. Well, there's many times, my parents sat me down, da-da-da-da-da. At night, I always have horrible diarrhea. Well, you went through a horrible breakup at night, so, and that's when your symptoms started. So we're trying to find, the therapy is, it's not like, oh, we're going to talk this thing to death until you don't cry about it anymore. It's not like that. Like we'll talk about that. Sometimes we need to do that, but it's just becoming consciously aware of what your PTSD triggers are. Remember, for the soldiers coming home from war, bam, loud noise, that's the PTSD trigger. And it makes them freak out. You have something like that, but it's not as obvious. It's unconscious, you're just not aware of it. You're not consciously aware of it. And then usually by the time you get to that, most people's symptoms are gone. But then for some people, depending on their situation, they need to actively resolve the conflict. Maybe and again, I've worked with many people who they're still in a stressful relationship. They're still in a bad marriage. They're still in a super stressful job situation, and they have no symptoms. Like super stressful jobs. I have one person who was like a politician, super stressful job, doesn't have any symptoms. But sometimes we do need to resolve the conflict. And if you don't understand the basics of psychology, I don't even know if the right word's psychology. I would call it more logic. Like we don't even we can't, the average person can't define what an emotion is. And when they have like Google up on their phone and they're Googling it and you're asking ChatGPT, what is an emotion? It can't give a good answer. That's how confused we are in society about how our brain works. And so I go over how a traumatized mind works and just how stress operates in the brain and give you that education. Because right now we're trying to play chess and we don't even know how the chess pieces move. And you're wondering why, you're terrible at the game. Because you literally have no idea how anything works, and you're actually given a set of instructions that are just going to make you automatically lose. So I'm going to give you the right instructions on how our brain deals with stress, what stress is, what our emotions are, how the traumatized mind works, so you can navigate life better and live a more happier life and not have your gut flying in and out of overdrive. This is how to find your conflict. So people usually invest hours making their timeline. The majority of the time I spent when I'm on a coaching call with somebody, I literally have a Word document up and we're doing a timeline. Oh, in childhood, this and that happened. And I say, okay, when did your symptoms start? They started when I was 20. Okay, I don't care about your childhood. What happened when you were 20? And then the person's like, well, in childhood, my parents got a divorce. That's awful, but I don't care. What happened when you were 20? That is when your symptoms started. What happened when you were 20? And this used to really frustrate me. But when I started to learn how a traumatized mind works, and the mind's like, I don't want it, that memory is too painful. I don't want to go back there. I don't like change. I don't want to go back there. It just makes sense. So looking through old emails and Facebook messages and text messages and your photo reel on your phone and looking at your Facebook and your Instagram to see what was going on, this can give us we're kind of being like a little detective. But we really need to invest time. A lot of the times we'll spend an hour putting this together, and then everyone's exhausted. We're like, oh, I can't do anymore. I can't think anymore. And while you're driving your car or taking a shower, you're like, oh, Oh, I remember. Like it just comes to you in a flash. So looking for your conflict, not just the conflict, but I was in a super stressful relationship. So yeah, the relationship was my conflict. It's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for the shocking moment. The shocking moment. When she threw when you caught her, when you caught your boyfriend cheating on you with your best friend. Not my boyfriend was cheating on me with my best friend. How did you find out? Was it through a text message? Was it, you came home early from work? That shocking moment, that's where the subconscious PTSD triggers are formed. That's where the tracks are formed. So, a lot of people will stop at the conflict. Oh, yeah, I was in a stressful relationship. But, okay. But what was the shocking moment where your symptoms started? And then what was the resolution? Was it when you got back together or you got a new girlfriend? We're like trying to bring this conflict to consciousness. And I usually do it with a Word doc and a million questions. That's how I normally do it. And sometimes it really helps to have a family member like your mother or father or your spouse there to help get a second perspective. Then to find your PTSD triggers, what you need to do is just record what's going on, the second you get symptoms, especially if it's diarrhea. It's like, okay, diarrhea, 8 o'clock at night. Wow, I've had diarrhea at 8 o'clock at night every single day this week. Huh. Is it when I brush my teeth? Every time I brush my teeth, I get diarrhea? Huh. Oh, wow. I remember one time I was brushing my teeth and yeah, I remember the shock. Oh, I remember the shock now. I was brushing my teeth when I looked over at my boyfriend's phone and, he was texting some other girl. They can be as stupid as that. Sometimes I've seen the PTSD triggers be like, every time somebody like picks up their phone, which we do like 20 times a day, and the person goes to the bathroom 20 times a day. So, and a lot of trauma happens through our phone nowadays. And just bringing that doing this detective work is the therapy. People are like asking me like, what's the therapy? What's the therapy? Doing this detective work is the therapy. And you can do it a million different ways. But my 13-day protocol has it really structured in this 13-day format. I see a lot of people, they don't know why they're stressed. They're like, I'm just so stressed. I don't know why. And you like look at their calendar and you're like, you say you're stressed out about money, but you have 3 expensive hobbies that you don't even seem to like. Start axing hobbies, And most of our life is governed by these subconscious impulses. Like, oh, I'm thirsty. I'm going to go drink water. I'm going to go drink something. I'm low on energy. I need something sweet. Oh, I feel lonely. Like, oh, I'm going to join some hobby. I can't quit this. Why can't I quit the club? I hate this club, but why can't I? Because if you quit the club, your caveman brain, your primitive brain is going, we're out of the tribe and we're going to starve to death. There's this show on Netflix where there's people like camping in Alaska and like you can't survive on yourself because like you'll like freeze to death at night if you don't have the other people next to you. And you really start to see, we've like lived this way for thousands and millions of years. Like our primitive brain hasn't caught up to living a civilized life. And so you might be in this imaginary cage that our primitive mind is like operating off these old primitive rules to try to keep us safe in the wild, where they're really hindering us and getting in the way in the modern world. And this is something I explore in a ton more detail. And this has brought me like so much clarity and relief and directing my life in a less stressful manner and more happy manner. When I understand like 99% of what's going on in our brain is subconscious or unconscious. And when you understand these impulses, we can guide our lives better and more efficiently. So in my bio link, I have like a free mini version of my 13-day protocol where, I kind of give you some more details and give you a little bit more guidance on the therapy. But for sure, go down and sign up for my webinar. It is a free mini version of my 13-day protocol. And so essentially what my 13-day protocol is, it's educational videos where I go over the basics of German New Medicine. I teach you how a traumatized mind works, where they don't teach you that very well in German New Medicine. German New Medicine doesn't teach you about the therapy and how to do the timelines and how to find your tracks. I hate to say this, I wish they did, and I get a lot of people complain about this, but there's not a lot of official material that teaches you how to do that stuff. And then a lot of it is not from a gut health perspective, because if you do another G&M course, they're going to be talking about how the eyeball works, how your foot works, and how all this stuff works, when all you care about is how the gut works. This is the education. I'm breaking the beliefs that around food and stuff like that. But my favorite part of my 13-day protocol is the workbook. And there's something about writing things down that reaches the deep subconscious part of your brain, and that changes these neural pathways that are putting your gut in and out of overdrive. And for each day, I have like a video. Like on day one, go watch the day one video, and I'm doing the workbook myself, like I'm doing it like I'm doing it on myself, so you know exactly what to do. It's like I'm there holding your hand, doing it with you. So here are some Crohn's frequently asked questions. What are not Crohn's disease symptoms? So these in modern medicine will get labeled as Crohn's disease symptoms, but they're not. They are separate conditions. They are not from the intestines. A perianal fistula or abscess are from the perianal ducts. I have a separate video on these. Anal fissures and hemorrhoids, they're on the rectum surface mucosa. They're not part of the intestinal mucosa, submucosa. They're similar but separate organs. Anemia, which is low red blood cells, low iron in the blood, very tired. This is caused by the bones going in and out of overdrive. But, and just blood loss from bloody stools intensifies that symptom, but it's a totally separate condition. There's a lot of people with a ton of blood loss that I've met that aren't anemic because their bones aren't going in and out of overdrive. And that's explained perfectly by German New Medicine. Arthritis and bone pain. A lot of people who have Crohn's disease, they have bone pain, but a lot of them don't. If somebody had anemia or arthritis or bone pain, Dr. Hammer would look in a certain part of the brain and they would have activity there. If they didn't, they didn't have activity there. So it's caused by a different type of conflict shock. So for the intestines is what is I wanted to absorb but I can't. For the colon is what is crap I want to get rid of but I can't. But for the bones, it's like a self-devaluation. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough to do whatever. Mouth ulcers are very similar to the anal fissures and hemorrhoids. It's not part of the intestinal mucosa cells. They're different types of cells. They respond differently in the conflict active and then in the post-conflict resolution phase. So for anal fissures and mouth ulcers, during the conflict active phase, it's cell loss. So you get that burning pain. And then when the conflict gets resolved, it's cell restoration. And it becomes inflamed and sometimes even itchy. And it's the exact opposite of what the intestines are doing. Liver inflammation, it's not even part of the digestive system. It's a completely separate organ. They're not Crohn's symptoms. It's a completely separate condition, along with kidney stones. They completely separate organs, completely separate conditions. Is Crohn's disease genetic? The answer is yes and no. So all animals within intestines can get Crohn's disease. They can experience a traumatic event that they subconsciously experienced as like, I can't absorb this thing important to my survival. And it makes a lot of sense when you look at like single-celled organisms or, very tiny organisms, like, oh yeah, like it really helps them. But like it starts to get a little bit more like, it's more of a nuisance for mammals. But even most mammals don't have the type of issues us modern humans do, because us modern humans have this imagination, which is like a double-edged sword, where we can really, through our perceptions, make a conflict worse than it actually is and cause our gut to go into overdrive more. Where if, the same thing happened to an animal, like they wouldn't even perceive it as an issue. So technically you inherited it from mom and dad and grandma and grandpa, but all life on earth can pretty much get Crohn's disease. If an animal has a small intestine and a large intestine or intestines, it comes in many different shapes and sizes, they could technically have Crohn's disease. Evolution thinks it's a good strategy for survival, and it makes a lot of sense when you look at the evolutionary timeline on Earth. Life has been around for about 2 billion years. For half of that time, we've been very small, single-celled organisms. Here, we're getting like a little bit bigger. Here, like this is a billion years, half a billion years, and then here, plants start to show up. And then somewhere in here, mammals start to show up. And then here, monkeys and apes and humans start to show up. So modern society hasn't even been around for a fraction of a percent, and evolution is a very slow process. Dr. Hammer would even look at the brain CT scans of his dogs, and one of his dogs had hemorrhoids, and sure enough, like right where the Hammer focused the ring on the CT scan was supposed to be, it was there. Should I avoid gluten if I have Crohn's disease? So in Weston A. Price's work, a lot of people read this book wrong. I don't know how, but many of the primitive populations he witnessed ate grains with every single meal. And this is from an older book that's about Crohn's disease. This is from before when they called it Crohn's disease, but they had colitis and I think they called it celiac back then. If you look at like the list of food intolerances, like gluten's not even on the list. Wheat's not even on the list, because it was so absurd to think that wheat was bad for you. Wheat is so essential to human life, especially, before our modern age. It's like being allergic to water. Like it just doesn't make any sense that there's something toxic in it that's I know modern wheat, it's been genetically modified, which there's no GMO wheat on the market, so I don't know why people keep saying that. It's nonsense. I used to say, glyphosate's, sucks. I wish they didn't use pesticides and all this stuff, but there are people eating it every day and they're relatively fine. You ate it the majority of your life and you were relatively fine, and you took wheat out of your diet and you're still having symptoms. So if all those statements are true, and they are true, then logically we can safely assume that it's not caused by wheat. But your subconscious belief of the wheat, and then also the trauma going on behind the scenes that we weren't aware of before. But back when this book was written, it was insane to be allergic to wheat, because I don't think most people even know what wheat is. It's grass seed. It's grass seed. And so you would harvest the grass, with the big old scythe thing that the Grim Reaper has, right? And you would use it for all sorts of things. You would make bread, you would make beer, you would make porridge. Like you had all these food products you would make from the wheat. And then you would take the straw and you would feed it to the cows. And then that would give you milk. And then you could, some people made a thatched roof. Some people used it as bedding. So you could make a broom out of it. Like it had so many uses to it. It was used in like everyday life, but So it was just crazy to even, it's not even on the list. If you're reacting to gluten, it's because, somehow bread or gluten was involved with the traumatic event, which is, we eat gluten 3 times a day. So, that's very easy for that to happen. And then you have the whole holistic community telling you that protein's bad for you. So, it's very easy to have a gluten intolerance before, but whereas in the past, you weren't encouraged to be afraid of gluten. Should you avoid dairy if you have Crohn's disease? So Weston A. Price, when he visited these primitive populations, a lot of them, if they had access to it, they were consuming dairy. And for a long time, the raw milk cure was very successful in treating people. But again, the main therapeutic element was having them be on bed rest and not talk to anybody, which would resolve their conflicts and allow their body to fully go through the healing process. And the milk fueled the healing process. But where milk becomes an allergy is if it's somehow related to the traumatic event. Maybe as a kid you weren't allowed to have ice cream and you lost your mind, something like that. Maybe you were forced to drink milk as a kid and the lunch lady poured milk, or maybe the bully poured milk over your head or something. You see that in movies and stuff like that. Somehow the milk is related to the conflict. And milk, for all mammals on Earth, is literally the thing that keeps you alive. And most modern humans today, they're removed from the very thing that keeps them alive way too early. And so, there might be stuff going on in that respect. Will cold therapy help Crohn's disease? Doing like the Wim Hof method and doing ice baths and cold baths. So there's this idea in holistic medicine and being healthy that the more you suffer, the healthier you will be. So the reason, which is nonsense. So the reason why Wim Hof started this is because he had insane, strong depression when his wife passed away. And he used the negative stimulus of the cold to control his mind versus negative stimuli. The sad thoughts about his wife passing. He would use the cold to help train his mind to control his thoughts around negative stimuli. Doing cold therapy, even if you do it with the right intention, is very dangerous for somebody who is underweight and they're a walking skeleton, because it's a ton of stress on the body that the body is not ready for. The cold therapy should only be used to help train your mind against negative stimuli. And that's the only way that it helps. But if you still have all those beliefs of being afraid of food and you have to walk this holistic tightrope to get better, it's not gonna do anything. You have to find the conflict and find the PTSD triggers, and cold therapy doesn't help with that. So I would much rather have someone invest their time and energy into that than spending half the day trying to figure out where they can buy a bucket of ice from. Will probiotics help Crohn's disease? So during the conflict active phase, these so-called bad bacteria and fungi start to develop on these extra gut cells. Then when the conflict gets resolved, the bad bacteria and fungi help remove those extra gut cells. So if you take probiotics, this just adds more bacteria and fungi to the party and actually increases symptoms. So they're expensive, number one. They run the risk of increasing your symptoms. And even if you get the best probiotic in the world, the only thing that controls your gut microbiome truly is the conflict shock and the PTSD triggers. So, they have quite a bit of risk with them, and so I don't think they're worth taking. I really don't recommend them at all. Does Crohn's disease cause cancer? So when you start to look at your health or cancer through a German New Medicine perspective, remember that study I referenced earlier and this wasn't Dr. Hammer just doing this. There's other studies that show that, colon tumors and stomach tumors produce more digestive juices to help you digest this hard to digest thing in your life. Hey, imagine sucking on a lemon right now. Don't you feel your taste buds already swelling up? That's essentially a traumatic event. Put that part of the body in overdrive. So, I don't want to scare you guys in any way, but essentially, Crohn's and colitis is your body actually removing intestinal tumors. Now, in the small intestine, only flat growths can form. So, someone almost, so when you're like looking at it on a camera, it's like kind of hard to call it cancer. But in the colon, flat growths can grow, and the cauliflower growths can grow, which, they looks like a tumor. So, I mean, this is a whole nother big discussion, but does Crohn's cause cancer? Crohn's is removing your intestinal tumors. But we're not even, it's like we got to have a whole conversation before we can make sense of what that sentence just meant. So I know a lot of people are scared to death of getting cancer, because they have Crohn's disease, because, they have a parent or a grandparent that had colon cancer that was really bad. But the truth of the matter is it's not as bad as it makes it out to be. It's actually, most of the symptoms are actually from the chemotherapy drugs. They're so toxic, and they're so, and that's not, I'm not being a conspiracy theorist here. Like, everyone who goes on chemo usually gets, especially if it's a strong dose, they get really sick. Dr. Hammer made these discoveries. He had the brain CT scan side by side and watched the brain CT scan change as the person was conflict active, and they went into the conflict resolution phase. And, not just on the intestines, but on all the different organs of the body. So Crohn's does not cause cancer, intestinal cancer. It is cancer in its own way, and it's also removing tumors in its own way. And you gotta look at it from the German New Medicine perspective to really understand what's going on there. But during the conflict active phase, there's the cell growth, which could be classified as a tumor. You can look at a tumor here when someone's super conflict active and it's growing big. The growth is in proportion to how stressful you perceive the conflict to be. But if you catch the person, if you happen to do the biopsies and look at the tumor on days where, the conflict is almost resolved or, tiny, then it's it's not there. Or if you catch it here, it's in the process of being removed, so there, we got to start looking. This could be a whole nother video, but we got to start looking at it from the German New Medicine perspective. Is Crohn's incurable? Is there a cure for Crohn's disease? So I really hate when people say, is Crohn's incurable? It's better to say, just so our subconscious can start heading in the right direction. Is there a cure for Crohn's yet? Because to say it's incurable, it's almost what's the point of even looking? I just give up. Versus, when will we find the cure? We haven't found a cure yet. There's this possibility that there is a cure. And the only way to fix it is to address this conflict and get it under control. Not only the conflict shock, the conflict, and also its PTSD triggers. That is the current cure. Easier said than done, depending on the person's life situation and how easily, they adopt this mindset. Does Crohn's disease cause mental health problems? So once again, this question showcases how much the average person is just uneducated about how the mind operates. So a lot of people are like, oh, stress is bad. Feeling stressed out is bad. Being angry is bad. Being sad is bad. But feeling angry is a survival response. Feeling sad is a survival response to a threat to your survival. If somebody's waving a gun in front of you, you're going to feel scared so you don't provoke the person to shoot you. If somebody, if like an animal attacks you, you might feel angry, and that anger, that emotion, is to help you fight this animal off so you don't get eaten to death by this animal. Crohn's is a threat to your survival. You are going to feel sad about it if you don't have a solution. You're going to feel angry about it if you think your GI doctor is an idiot and he should be helping you, but he isn't, or he's telling you the wrong thing to do, and you do what he says and nothing's helping. You might get angry at him. That's how I felt, because that was my perception. Or you might just feel sad that, it's just hopeless. So your mental health problems aren't the problem. Your conflicts and your inability to resolve your conflict, and I don't mean that to make it sound like you're incompetent or being mean, but our inability to solve our conflicts, or we have so many dramas on TV nowadays. You have music over dramatizing how stressful it is to be broken up with, and there's only one true love for you, and all this stuff. Like, our perceptions and our memories really shape like how we experience an event. James Bond gets broken up with a girl, no big deal. There's more. The average teenager gets broken up, a girl breaks up with them, it's the end of the world because he listened to one too many Taylor Swift songs. And it's like so subconsciously ingrained that life's over if your girlfriend breaks up with you. But James Bond, he's different. He knows there's there's a solution to not having a girlfriend. It's go get another one. And I have the skills to do it. If you have Crohn's disease and you know how to fix it, you're going to be a lot less stressed out about it than somebody who has Crohn's disease and has no idea how to fix it, and the symptoms are really bad. So our mental health problems are in proportion to the conflicts in our life, whether you are conscious of them or not, of what those conflicts are. And most of us are not conscious of what those conflicts are. It's just like, I'm stressed out today, I feel bad today. And you might be able to list one or two reasons why you're angry or mad or sad that day, but there's probably also another, it's just the tip of the iceberg. But really, usually with Crohn's, it's like the thing that you're angry about, you're frustrated about, you're suppressing that anger and frustration. That's usually, that conflict that's causing the suppression of anger and resentment. Like, I can't talk back to my parents, I can't talk back to my boss, I can't talk back to my teachers, I hate them, they're angry, this is stupid, I can't digest money because they're stupid. Something like that is at the root of your Crohn's, and it just comes to this runaway snowball at some point where your conflicts antagonize each other. What's the difference between Crohn's and colitis? So Crohn's is typically a term used to describe, they could have inflammation anywhere from mouth to butthole, whereas colitis is you have inflammation only in your colon. And sometimes you'll hear people who have, they'll say they'll have Crohn's and colitis, and then usually what they mean is they have inflammation in their small intestine and large intestine. No one's regulating these terms. It's the wild, wild west. So, anytime somebody says they have Crohn's, I'm like, okay, pull up your lab studies and let's look at them, because, it could literally mean anything. What's the difference between Crohn's and IBS, irritable bowel syndrome? So let's say somebody has gut symptoms and they do all these tests, they do the MRIs, they do the colonoscopies, and they're like, I don't see inflammation anywhere. I don't know what's wrong with you, but you're still having symptoms. I don't know what's going on. Then usually that person will get an IBS diagnosis. So if you have Crohn's right now, literally the best thing you could do is sign up for my webinar, which is a free mini version of my 13-day protocol. It's like an hour video where I just give you more information on what you need to do to get better and help you understand in a little bit more detail what's going on in your gut. But if I had to do it all over again, I would sign up for my full price 13-day protocol and use that to get better. I mean, I've tried to map it out as my job is to help you get better as fast as possible with the least amount of effort, and that is my 13-day protocol.